Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to SA Accounting Academy. Here's a short clip on one of our previous webinars. I hope that you really do enjoy it.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Right, great stuff. Okay, so we have liftoff with the sound. Let's hope that the sound is as clear as the skies are today. On this rather chilly morning, a warm welcome to you to our webinar for this morning. Our webinar for today is on the new Q&A document that was issued on the revised non-assurance services provisions of the code. So the new NAS services. I always find that when they revise the code, it's like when you try and read it, it's really not a good idea. I actually battle to find it, meaningful so that you can actually read it properly. So it's always a good idea when they have documents like this one that actually asks the right questions and gives us the answers in a very clear way. So I always like the Q&A docs, and I'm glad that you guys are here this morning to listen to it. So let's just talk about it for a very brief moment. It was issued by IESBA, right? IESBA is a subcommittee or one of the committees of IFAC. IFAC is the International Federation for Accountants, and all the professional bodies are member bodies of IFAC. So hence the code that was issued by IESBA is then adopted by all the professional bodies, and the name has just changed because the IESBA code talks about the professional accountant, because it gives us its guidance for professional accountants, and the code is for professional accountants. And what then happens is when somebody like IESBA adopts the code, they then change the word from professional accountant, it gets changed to registered auditors. So it's important, number one, so that we understand today, what are these provisions? What are the things that have changed in terms of non-assurance provisions? And where are the nigglies, right? So I always feel that's something that we need to go and look for. So the reason why this was issued, and it was issued by the staff of the IESBA. I always find that it's best when the staff actually compile the documents, because they are the ones that deal with the questions. They are the ones that have to field the questions that come in through the landlines and through the emails, and fielding questions specifically on changes to the code, revisions to the code. So this document they then issued as guidance for professional accountants in public practice, right? In public practice in relation to audits of financial statements of public interest entities. So two things very important that we have to understand here. This will apply to you if you are an RA in public practice or a professional accountant in public practice, meaning that you perform assurance services. And these non-assurance services relate to the audits of financial statements of public interest entities. So if you are already auditing a PIE, right, a public interest entity, then there are certain prohibitions in terms of the code on the non-assurance services that you can provide. Now, remember that in South Africa, we've got Section 90, subsection 2, which is specific to us in South Africa, our Companies Act, which talks very clearly about which are the services that we can provide, right? Which are the services that we can provide and which are the ones that we cannot provide. So we can provide services in terms of the guidance that IESBA have issued. I think it was joint guidance that was issued between SAICA and IESBA, almost 10 years ago, I'm sure. They issued the guidance, that guidance doc on that. And in there, for instance, on company secretarial services, we can provide services that register new directors, changes in directors. We can do those. We can lodge those for them. But we are not allowed to act as the company secretary. When it comes to provision of tax services, that's not prohibited. But remember that we always have got to, if we don't, if it's not prohibited in terms of something like the Companies Act in South Africa, we always have to fall back on the code. And the code is where we have got to go and see Are there any threats to our independence? Because why? Because we are auditing a client and we are now providing non-assurance services, in other words, tax services to that same client. So would it be allowed or would it not? Because the important thing for us is in documenting it, right? You'll see that the very last question they ask in this document relates to should we or should we not um, do that? Okay. In terms of the quotes, I always like to do a bit of quotes, and I just went to go and type in code of conduct, and I found Thomas Monson, who said, our code of conduct is definitive. It is not negotiable. And I like that because it should be definitive. Your ethics, your code of conduct gives you the rules of the road that you should operate within from an ethical standpoint, right? What you are and are not allowed to do in your capacity as a professional accountant or as an RA. So your code of conduct, and yes, ours is also definitive and it's also not negotiable. If you do not adhere to the code of conduct, you can be found guilty of misconduct. Remember, we've got our code of conduct and we've got the disciplinary rules. So, and in terms of IESBA, you will then be subject to a disciplinary hearing and all sorts. Right. This is an unknown quote that I've found, but it says, conduct is the best proof of character. So if you want to, they always say, if you want to know how somebody acts, watch their actions. If you want to know what somebody believes, listen to their words and then follow it through to their actions. Because it's one thing to talk a good game, it's another thing to actually take it into action, right? Looking at what's on the agenda, how this webinar will progress, I'm going to start off with a quick introduction, and then we're going to look at the 23 frequently asked questions, or Q&As, because they're not frequently asked, they are Q&As. Same thing, you just spell it differently, okay? And the 5 subheadings that they've given us is general prohibitions and applying the conceptual framework to non-audit services or non-assurance services. Because remember, the conceptual framework is the basis of our code of conduct. If you remember correctly, I think it was about a year and a half ago, I did a whole webinar series on the IESBA code when it as it got revised. And there are 12 installments to that. So if you are not quite happy with what's changed in all sorts, please go and have a look at that. There's also a landing page that you can follow. It is also on IFAC's website, and I have given you the link to that at the end of the webinar so that you can actually access the code of conduct, and in there you can find what they call the landing page as well for the code. Right. So that's the first one. Secondly, is applying provisions relating to a self-review threat to independence. And this looks at when you are providing advice and recommendations to an audit client, because you've got to be very careful in creating a self-review threat. A self-review threat is where you literally give advice on stuff that or you review stuff that you've done. So providing advice and recommendations to an audit client can get very, very tricky. And specifically, you'll remember that the non-assurance services prohibitions relate specifically to public interest entities, because those are the ones of high interest, right? Of high public interest. And as public accountants, professional accountants, and registered auditors, we are there to look after the public interest. So we are the custodians of public interest there. Thirdly, we will look at provisions relating to specific types of non-assurance services. I think we look specifically off the top of my head, there's advice services and there's provision of tax services. Right. So very important there. Then lastly, your communication with those charged with governance about NAS. Do you need to communicate anything with them, or is it just, I mean, it's our code of conduct. So why should you worry about communicating with your audit committees and with management and stuff? So we will look at that. That is a very important item to me. And then under other matters, there's one or two items that also are very, very important. And then we're just going to close off. So we are literally going to go through all of these questions, quickly looking at a question and an answer. Where necessary, I'll spend some more time on it, and if you have questions, we can then go into it and go through the question in detail. All right. But in a nutshell, I would say that the document's actually very, very well put together, and I like the fact that they've grouped it under these 5 subheadings. All right.
I hope that you enjoyed that video. For more of our webinar videos, go to www.accountingacademy.co.za. Thank you and have a lovely day.